The first message came from my mother at 8:07 on a Tuesday morning. You need to fix this. The second came less than a minute later. Emily can't go to jail. Then my father called. I stared at my phone from behind the bench in my courtroom, listening to the quiet shuffle of papers and the low voices of the courtroom clerk and attorneys, preparing for the morning docket. My father called again. I didn't answer. A fourth message appeared. You're her sister, take responsibility. I read that sentence twice. Then I looked down at the black robe covering my shoulders and felt something inside me go completely still. My name is Claire Bennett. I'm 42 years old. And for the past 3 years, I've been a state trial judge. My family didn't know that. Or, more accurately, they had never cared enough to ask. The night before, my father had placed a typed statement in front of me at my parents' kitchen table. It was already prepared. My name was at the bottom. All I had to do was sign it. The statement claimed that I had been driving my sister Emily's car the night it struck another vehicle and left the scene. I hadn't. Emily had. And my family had decided that my life was the easiest one to sacrifice. My mother had cried while explaining that Emily had 2 children, a mortgage, and a career. You have your career, she'd whispered. You'll survive this. I remember looking at her and thinking, that's what you think my life is worth? My father had been less gentle. Claire, this is what sisters do. No, I told him. This is what people do when they're afraid of consequences. He slammed his palm against the table. You're destroying this family. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't hit anyone. That was when he told me I had always thought I was better than them. He was wrong. I had spent most of my life trying to prove I wasn't. If you've ever been the person your family expects to stay strong, no matter how badly they hurt you, you may understand what happened next. And if you've ever been asked to sacrifice yourself to protect someone who was always treated as more important than you, stay with me, because this story gets much deeper than one traffic accident. But to understand why I finally stopped protecting my family from the consequences of their choices, you need to know what my family had taught me about my place in it. I was the older daughter, and that meant I was supposed to handle everything. My father, Richard Bennett, was an insurance broker who cared deeply about appearances. Our house was always clean when guests came over. The lawn was always trimmed. My mother, Linda, knew exactly what to say at neighborhood gatherings to make our family sound close, successful, and perfectly ordinary. Inside that house, things were different. I had a younger sister named Emily. She was 4 years younger than me, and from the time we were children, everyone seemed to understand that Emily was special. Not special in the way parents usually tell their children they are special. Emily was the one who needed protecting. I was the one who could handle things. When I brought home an excellent report card, my father would glance at it and say, "That's what we expect from you." When Emily barely passed a difficult class, my mother would bake her a cake because, in her words, she worked so hard. I remember sitting at the kitchen counter, watching my sister blow out the candles. I wasn't jealous of the cake, I was jealous of how easily everyone celebrated her. Emily was charming, outgoing, and naturally good at making people feel sorry for her. If she forgot something, someone rescued her. If she made a mistake, someone explained it away. I learned early that mistakes were different when I made them. When I was 16, I missed curfew by 20 minutes. My father grounded me for a month. When Emily came home 2 hours late at 17, my mother hugged her because she thought something terrible might have happened. I didn't understand the pattern then. I only knew that I was expected to be responsible, while Emily was allowed to be human. As we got older, that difference followed us. My father called Emily the heart of the family. He called me the responsible one. For years, I thought that was a compliment. Eventually, I realized it was a job description. I was expected to solve problems. I helped Emily with college applications. I reviewed her apartment lease. I helped her understand insurance forms. When she had childcare problems, I rearranged my schedule. Whenever I hesitated, my mother said the same thing. Family helps family, but when I needed help, the answer was usually different. You're strong, Claire. You'll figure it out. You don't need anyone. I eventually went to law school and paid much of my way through it myself. My parents helped Emily buy her first car. They helped with her housing. They celebrated every small accomplishment. Meanwhile, my career became something my family rarely discussed. I eventually became a practicing attorney, and later, after years of work and a rigorous appointment process, I became a judge. I didn't announce the details to my family. I simply told them I had accepted a judicial position. Nobody asked what that meant. Nobody asked what court. Nobody asked what my responsibilities were. They were too busy talking about Emily. And maybe that should have hurt me more than it did, because by then I had already learned something I couldn't unlearn. In my family, being needed was the closest thing to being loved, and I had spent years making sure they needed me. I just didn't know yet that one day they would ask me to pay for that love with my freedom. By the time I reached my 30s, I had become the person everyone called when something went wrong. Emily needed help with her taxes. I handled it. She had a problem with an apartment lease. I read the paperwork. Her insurance company denied a claim. She called me before she called anyone else. And every time I helped, my mother repeated the same sentence. That's what family is for. I believed her for a long time. Then, slowly, I began noticing that the rule only worked in one direction. When Emily needed something, family helped. When I needed something, I was reminded that I was strong enough to handle it myself. One of the clearest examples happened when Emily had her first serious traffic accident. She had been distracted while driving and damaged another driver's vehicle. Nobody was seriously hurt, but Emily panicked. My father called me that night. "You understand these things," he said. "Can you talk to the insurance company?" I helped Emily understand what paperwork she needed, but I refused to lie about what happened. My father wasn't happy. "You're being difficult." "I'm being honest," he sighed. Sometimes honesty isn't the most important thing. I didn't realize how important that sentence would become. Another memory came from a family holiday. Emily made a joke about my career while everyone was sitting around the dinner table. "She's basically married to a courtroom," she said. Everyone laughed. I smiled too. But inside something tightened. They had no idea how many nights I had spent studying case law, preparing arguments, reviewing files, and wondering whether I was good enough. They only saw the woman who always had an answer. They never saw the years it took to become her. Still, I kept helping them. I helped Emily with childcare emergencies. I helped my parents review financial paperwork. I drove across town when my mother locked herself out of her house. I even helped Emily when she needed to refinance her car. But whenever I tried to set a boundary, my mother looked hurt. "You've changed." Maybe I had. Maybe I was finally becoming someone who understood that helping people and allowing them to use you were not the same thing. Then Emily made another mistake. This time, there was no insurance form I could complete. No apartment lease I could review. No phone call I could make disappear. It happened on a Thursday night. Emily had gone to a birthday dinner at a restaurant with several family friends. She had been drinking. Not enough to appear visibly drunk to everyone around her, but enough to make a terrible decision. When she left the restaurant, she backed her SUV into another vehicle in the parking area. The impact was loud enough for someone nearby to turn around. Emily stopped. For a few seconds, she sat behind the steering wheel. Then she drove away. There was a security camera. There was a witness. And there was a partial license plate. Emily called my father before she called anyone else. I didn't know any of that yet. What I knew was that my phone rang shortly after midnight. It was Emily. Her voice was shaking. "Claire? What's wrong?" There was silence. Then she whispered, "Dad says you can fix this." I sat upright in bed. "What happened?" Another silence. Then Emily said, "I think I'm in trouble." I closed my eyes. I knew that tone. It wasn't the tone of someone looking for help telling the truth. It was the tone of someone looking for a way out. And somewhere across town, my father was already deciding which daughter should carry the consequences. There was one thing my family didn't understand about me. I wasn't simply a lawyer anymore. 3 years earlier, after years of practicing law, I had been appointed as a state trial judge. It was one of the hardest achievements of my life. The appointment had required years of preparation, scrutiny, interviews, professional recommendations, and a level of responsibility I had never taken lightly. When I accepted the position, I didn't throw a party, I didn't post photographs everywhere. I didn't call my parents and demand congratulations. I simply told them I had accepted a judicial position. My mother said, "That's nice, sweetheart." My father asked whether the hours would be better. That was it. They never asked what court. They never asked what kind of cases I would hear. They never asked what the robe meant, so I stopped explaining. Maybe some part of me wanted them to notice. Maybe another part of me had already accepted that they wouldn't. My professional life had also taught me something my family never expected me to understand so well. Truth wasn't flexible. A lie didn't become acceptable because the person asking for it was related to you. And I knew exactly what could happen when someone deliberately created a false story around a criminal investigation. So when Emily asked me to help her, I didn't offer to make the problem disappear. I told her to get an attorney. That answer didn't satisfy my father. The following morning, messages began arriving. "Dad, we need to talk." Then, "Mom, please don't make this worse for Emily." Then, "Emily, I know you understand. Please." I didn't answer immediately. Instead, I opened a folder on my computer. I began saving every message. I wasn't trying to build a case against my family. I was protecting myself, because I had already learned something from years inside the legal system. When people are frightened, memories change, messages don't. And there was already evidence that Emily had been driving. A traffic camera had captured her SUV near the scene. A restaurant receipt placed her at the location. A parking record narrowed down the time. The family story they were building wasn't going to survive the evidence. But that wasn't what frightened me most. What frightened me was realizing they knew it. They weren't asking me to help Emily prove she was innocent. They were trying to create another person for investigators to blame. Me. I printed the messages and placed them in a plain folder. Then I sat alone at my kitchen table, staring at my name on the first page. For years, I had wondered whether my family simply didn't understand me. That morning, I stopped wondering. They understood exactly who they thought I was. The daughter who would absorb the damage, the daughter who wouldn't fight back, the daughter who could lose everything and somehow still be expected to say thank you. But they had made one mistake. They had confused my silence with permission. And they were about to learn that the quietest person in the room can sometimes be the one who has been preparing the longest. The person I called was Mara Collins. Mara had been a colleague of mine years earlier, back when I was still practicing law. She was now an ethics attorney, and unlike most people in my life, she knew exactly how seriously I took my profession. She also knew something else. She knew what my family was like. I met her at a small coffee shop on a rainy Friday morning. I chose a table near the window, away from the other customers. I remember wrapping both hands around a cup of coffee I barely touched. Mara looked at me for a few seconds. "You haven't slept." "No." "What did they ask you to do?" I slid my phone across the table. She read the messages one by one. Her expression changed slowly. When she reached the message asking me to take responsibility, she put the phone down. "What do you want to protect?" she asked. I frowned. "Emily." That wasn't my question. I looked away. Mara leaned forward. "Do you want to protect Emily from the consequences of what she did, or do you want to protect the truth?" I didn't answer, because the honest answer hurt. Part of me still wanted to protect Emily. She was my little sister. No matter how many times my parents had placed her above me, no matter how many times she had taken advantage of my kindness, I remembered the little girl who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms. I remembered teaching her how to ride a bicycle. I remembered her crying the first time she got her heart broken. Those memories didn't disappear simply because she had become an adult who made terrible decisions. But Mara reminded me of something I had forgotten. "You can love someone without lying for them," she said. I looked at her. "You can help her find an attorney. You can tell her to cooperate. You can care about her children. But you cannot become the person who committed the crime just because your parents think you're the expendable daughter." That word stayed with me. Expendable. I had never described myself that way. But suddenly, it explained everything. My parents weren't choosing me because they trusted me. They were choosing me because they believed I had less to lose. Mara told me to stop having private conversations with my parents. If they want to communicate, keep it in writing. So I sent one message. I wrote that I would not claim responsibility for an incident I did not commit. I would not interfere with the investigation, and Emily needed independent legal counsel. My father's response came within minutes. You're hiding behind technicalities. My mother's followed. She's your sister, Claire. I stared at the screen. Mara read them. That's the trap, she said. What trap? They're trying to make honesty sound cruel. For the first time, I understood that my family wasn't asking me to choose between truth and loyalty. They were redefining loyalty so that truth became betrayal. I put my phone face down. I'm done explaining myself. Mara smiled faintly. Good. But I wasn't prepared for what my father had planned next. That evening, he called and told me there would be a family dinner at my parents' house. Everyone needs to be on the same page, he said. I almost laughed. I knew what that meant. They weren't gathering to discuss what had happened. They were gathering to decide what story everyone was supposed to tell, and this time, they wanted an audience. The dinner was 2 days after the accident. When I walked into my parents' house, I immediately knew something was wrong. The kitchen lights were bright. The dining table was already set. There were 6 plates. Richard was sitting at the head of the table. Linda sat beside him. Emily was there with her husband Mark. And my Aunt Janet was sitting quietly near the window. Janet had always been different from the rest of them. She didn't openly challenge my parents often, but she noticed things. She noticed who got interrupted, who got praised, who got blamed. She noticed me. My father waited until I sat down, then he folded his hands on the table. The investigation is getting bigger than expected. Emily looked down. I said nothing. Richard continued. They have video, I know. They may have a witness. I looked at Emily. She didn't look back. My father took a breath. This can still be handled. The way he said handled made my stomach tighten. How? He looked directly at me. You tell them you were driving. For a second, nobody moved. Even the refrigerator seemed loud. I thought I had misunderstood him. What? You had the car earlier that evening, he said. I didn't. You can explain that you borrowed it. No. His jaw tightened. Claire, listen to me. I am listening. Emily has children. I know. She has a mortgage. I know. She has a career. I looked at Emily. So I should lose mine? Nobody answered. Then my mother started crying. She made one terrible mistake. I looked at my sister. Why didn't you call me that night? Emily's lips trembled. Because Dad said you would understand. That sentence hurt more than anything else that evening. Not because my father had expected me to lie, because Emily had expected me to agree. My father reached into a folder and placed a typed statement on the table. My attorney prepared this. I looked at the paper. My name was printed at the bottom. All I had to do was sign it. I pushed it back. No. Richard's face hardened. You're really going to do this? I didn't do it. Linda covered her face. You're abandoning your sister. Janet finally spoke. Richard, asking Claire to take criminal responsibility isn't helping Emily. My father turned toward her. Stay out of this. Janet went silent. I looked at the statement one more time, then I looked around the table, and something inside me changed. For years, I had believed there was still a version of my family worth saving. That night, I realized they weren't asking me to save the family. They were asking me to disappear inside it. I stood up. I won't lie for you. My father's voice followed me toward the door. If you refuse, I'll make sure everyone knows what kind of sister you really are. I stopped. He thought public shame would frighten me into obedience. He didn't know that I had already spent years learning how to stand alone. And he certainly didn't know what I had already saved. The next evening, my father proved that his threat had never been an empty one. He called me and said there would be a family gathering at my parents' house. Just relatives, he told me. We need to clear the air. I should have known better. When I walked through the front door, I immediately noticed the living room was crowded. My cousins were there. 2 of my aunts were sitting on the sofa. Emily and Mark were beside my mother. My father stood near the fireplace with his arms folded. Nobody had told me this was going to be a public trial. But that's exactly what it felt like. Richard looked at me. "Claire, we're all here because Emily needs her family." I glanced around the room. Then why does everyone look like they've already decided something? Nobody answered. My father began talking before I could sit down. He told them Emily had made a mistake. He said she had panicked. He talked about her children, her mortgage, her job. He made everything sound tragic. Then he looked at me. "And Claire refuses to help." My cousin stared at me. "You can't seriously let your sister go through this alone." Another relative shook her head. "I thought family meant something to you." I stood there listening. Not one person asked me whether I had been driving. Not one. They had already accepted the story my father had created. Then he said something I'll never forget. "You've never had much of a family life anyway. At least this would be one useful thing you could do for your sister." The room went silent. I felt something inside me break. Not loudly, not dramatically, just enough that I knew I would never see these people the same way again. I looked at Emily. "Were you driving?" She looked at my father, then my mother, then at the floor. That hesitation was an answer. I took a breath. "I won't lie for you." My father stepped toward me. "You think you're better than us." "No. You've always thought that." "No. Then why won't you help your sister?" I looked directly at him. "Because helping her doesn't mean becoming the person who committed her crime." My mother began crying. Someone behind me whispered that I was being heartless. I almost defended myself. Then I stopped. For years, I had spent my life explaining myself to people who had already decided not to understand me. I wasn't doing it anymore. My Aunt Janet stood up. "Claire, come with me." We walked outside. The front door closed behind us. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then Janet said, "I'm sorry." I looked at her. "For what?" "For watching this happen for so many years." I didn't know what to say. She looked toward the house. "They've always protected Emily." "I know." "And they've always expected you to absorb the damage." I nodded. Janet touched my arm. "You don't have to do it anymore." That was the first time anyone in my family had ever said those words to me. That night, my father sent another message. "If you don't cooperate, don't expect to have a family anymore." I stared at it for a long time. Then I typed, "Then I accept your decision." I put my phone down. For the first time, I wasn't afraid of losing my family. I was afraid of losing myself. And I had finally decided which one mattered more. The next morning, my phone rang. It was not my father. It was an investigator. He introduced himself and asked whether I had a few minutes to discuss the statement my family had been trying to create. My stomach tightened. Yes. He explained that my name had appeared in connection with a written account that didn't match the existing evidence. I didn't panic. I didn't tell him what I thought he should do. I simply answered every question honestly. Then I called my attorney. I brought her the folder. Inside were screenshots of my parents' messages, the photograph I had taken of the statement, and a timeline I had written while the events were still fresh. She read everything carefully. "This is important," she said. "Because it proves Emily did it?" "The investigation already has evidence pointing toward Emily. This may establish something different." "What?" "That your family was attempting to manufacture a false account." I sat back. I had known they were lying. But seeing it organized on paper made it feel different. My attorney explained that the hit-and-run investigation and the family's attempt to shift blame were separate issues. She also reminded me that my position as a judge did not give me authority over Emily's case. In fact, it meant I had to be even more careful. I had already disclosed my relationship with Emily through the proper channels. I would not handle her case. Another judge would. I accepted that. My title wasn't a weapon. It was a responsibility, and I wasn't going to compromise it to protect people who had never respected it. The investigator confirmed what I already suspected. Security footage placed Emily's SUV near the scene. A restaurant receipt placed Emily at the birthday dinner. Parking records narrowed down the timing. A witness remembered seeing Emily leave, and my father's messages showed that he had proposed the false story before I ever agreed to anything. The truth was no longer something I had to defend. It was sitting inside a folder, documented, dated, saved. I went home that afternoon and placed everything in a locked drawer. Then I received a message from Emily. "I know you think you won, but you destroyed everything." I stared at those words. She still thought this was a competition. She still thought I had chosen myself over her. But that wasn't what I had done. I had simply refused to choose a lie over the truth. And there was one thing my family still didn't know. They had spent years believing I was just the responsible daughter who worked in law. They had no idea that the woman they had publicly accused of abandoning her sister was a state trial judge. And soon, they were going to find out. Several weeks passed before I saw my family again. During those weeks, I deliberately stayed away from the investigation as much as I could. My attorney handled questions that needed to be handled. The appropriate authorities handled the evidence, and another judge was assigned to Emily's case because I had properly disclosed our relationship. That distinction mattered to me. I didn't want my family to ever be able to say that I had used my position to hurt Emily. I hadn't. I had simply refused to let them use me to save her. Then one Monday morning, I arrived at the courthouse for my regular judicial duties. It was an ordinary morning. People moved through the marble hallway carrying folders and coffee cups. Attorneys stood near the elevators, quietly discussing their cases. Court officers checked their schedules. I was walking toward my courtroom when I saw my parents. Richard and Linda were standing near the elevators. Emily was with them. For a moment, nobody moved. My father saw me first. His expression changed immediately. He walked toward me. "Claire." I stopped. "Good morning." He glanced toward the courtroom doors. "Can we talk? I have work." "This won't take long." I already knew what he wanted. He lowered his voice. "Emily's hearing is today." "I know. Can you do something?" I looked at him. "What exactly are you asking?" He hesitated. Then he said the sentence that told me he still didn't understand. "Talk to someone." I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. "Dad, I'm not involved in Emily's case." "You could be." "No. You're a judge." "Yes." His frustration appeared instantly. "Then what good is being a judge?" I looked at him for several seconds. Then I said quietly, "You should have asked me what I did for a living before asking me to confess to a crime." My mother's face went pale. Emily looked at me. "What?" I didn't raise my voice. "I became a state trial judge 3 years ago." Silence. My father stared at me. I could almost see the years rearranging themselves in his mind. Every time he had dismissed my work as legal paperwork. Every time my mother had told relatives I was doing something administrative. Every time Emily had joked that I spent too much time behind a desk. They had never asked. Not once. My father finally whispered, "You're actually a judge?" "Yes." Emily looked stunned. "But you said you worked in law." "I do." My father shook his head. "You knew this whole time?" I almost smiled. "That I was a judge?" "Yes." "You never asked." That sentence landed harder than anything else I could have said. My father looked angry now. "You could have helped Emily," I answered carefully. "Being a judge doesn't mean I can make evidence disappear. It doesn't mean I can interfere with another judge's case. And it certainly doesn't mean I can make you innocent after you asked me to lie." Linda started crying. "We were desperate." "I know. We were trying to protect Emily." "No," I said. They both looked at me. "You were trying to protect one daughter by sacrificing the other." Emily lowered her head. My father immediately shook his head. "That isn't fair. Neither was asking me to take responsibility for something I didn't do." He looked around the hallway. People were beginning to notice us. An attorney, standing several feet away, glanced in our direction before quickly looking down at his papers. My father lowered his voice. "We never wanted this to become public. It became public when you decided my name was a better shield than the truth." Then Emily finally spoke. "I was driving." My mother closed her eyes. My father looked at her sharply. "Emily." "No, Dad." Her voice shook. "I was driving." She wiped her face. "I panicked. I hit the car and I thought someone had seen me. I didn't know what to do." I listened quietly. Then she said something that hurt more than I expected. "Dad told me Claire could handle it." My father didn't deny it. He looked at me. I was trying to protect my daughter. I took a slow breath. You were trying to protect one daughter by sacrificing the other. Nobody spoke. The hallway seemed suddenly enormous. Then my father said, "You gave those messages to them." "Yes. You could have kept them private." "I could have. Why didn't you?" I looked at him. "Because I was done carrying consequences for choices I didn't make." That was when he finally understood. The screenshots existed. The photograph of the false statement existed, the timeline existed, and the investigators already had the original evidence. I didn't need to threaten anyone. I didn't need to raise my voice. The truth had already done the work. Emily began crying. "I never wanted you to get hurt." I looked at her. "But you were willing to let me." She couldn't answer. My mother whispered, "We're still family." I shook my head. Family isn't supposed to mean that one person gets protected while another person gets sacrificed. My father looked toward the courtroom doors. "So what happens now?" I answered honestly. "Emily gets an attorney. She answers for what she did, and the case is decided by the judge assigned to it." He stared at me. "You really won't help?" "I am helping." "How?" "I'm refusing to lie." That was the last thing I said before walking away. I entered my courtroom, closed the door behind me, and took my seat. My hands were steady. That surprised me. For years, I had imagined the day my family would finally understand what I had become. I had thought it would feel triumphant. It didn't. It felt sad. Because the truth was, I had never wanted them to fear my position. I had only wanted them to respect the woman underneath it. Emily's case continued through the normal legal process. I stayed away. That was important. I didn't ask for updates. I didn't call anyone connected to the case. I didn't use my position to influence anything. Emily eventually accepted responsibility through her attorney. There were consequences. There had to be. There was restitution for the damaged vehicle and other legal obligations connected to leaving the scene. The outcome was handled according to the evidence and applicable law, not according to what my family wanted. And that distinction mattered. Because for the first time, Emily had to stand in front of consequences without Claire standing between her and them. Richard's situation became more complicated. His attempt to create a false account raised uncomfortable questions. Why had he suggested that I take responsibility? Why had he prepared a statement? Why had he sent messages pressuring me? He had wanted to protect the family's reputation. Instead, his own decisions became part of the damage. The extended family changed too. Some relatives called me. "I didn't know the whole story. I shouldn't have judged you." I was only trying to help Emily. I listened. But I didn't feel the need to correct every version of the past. Some people apologized because they finally understood. Others apologized because they felt embarrassed. I learned not to confuse the two. My professional life remained intact. That mattered deeply to me. I had followed every ethical requirement. I had disclosed the conflict. I had recused myself. I had preserved evidence without manipulating it. I had answered questions honestly. My family had tried to turn my position into a weapon. I had refused to let them. One morning, several weeks later, I arrived at my courtroom before anyone else. The room was empty. The wooden benches were perfectly still. The lights were low. I placed my files on the bench and sat down. For years, I had thought strength meant being able to endure anything. My parents had taught me that. Be the responsible one. Be understanding. Don't make things harder. Forgive. Help. Stay quiet. Absorb it. I finally understood that none of those things were the same as strength. Sometimes strength was simply saying no, and meaning it. I looked around my empty courtroom. I had spent years trying to prove to my family that I was worth respecting. Now I realized I didn't need to prove anything. The consequences of their choices were unfolding without my help, and for the first time, I wasn't standing in the middle of them. I was standing outside them. Free. But just when I thought the worst was finally behind me, my mother sent me a handwritten letter. It was 3 pages long, and at the bottom she had written, "Please meet me one last time." I kept my mother's letter on my kitchen counter for 3 days. I didn't open it immediately. I already knew what it would contain: an apology, an explanation, maybe even a few memories designed to remind me that, beneath everything that had happened, we were still family. Eventually, I opened it. My mother wrote that she was sorry. She said she had never realized how deeply I had been hurt. She said she had always thought I was strong enough to handle more than Emily. That sentence stopped me, because there it was again, the same belief that had followed me my entire life. I was strong, so I could be sacrificed. Emily was fragile, so she had to be protected. My mother wrote that she regretted what happened, and that the family had been desperate. But desperation didn't erase what they had done. It only explained why they had chosen to do it. I agreed to meet her. One time, we met at a quiet cafe halfway between our homes. My mother arrived first. She looked older than I remembered. When I sat down, she immediately started crying. "I am sorry, Claire." I nodded. "I believe that you're sorry." She seemed relieved. Then I continued. "But being sorry doesn't change what happened." Her face fell. "I never wanted you to think we didn't love you." "I didn't think that," I said. She looked confused. "I thought you loved me differently." She began crying harder. Richard eventually joined us. He sat across from me and kept his eyes on the table. "I made a terrible mistake," he said. I looked at him. "If I had signed that statement, would you have protected me afterward?" He didn't answer. That silence was all I needed. I wasn't angry anymore. I was finished. Emily sent her own apology a few days later. She said she understood why I couldn't trust her. She said she was ashamed. I read the message twice. Then I answered, "I hope you take responsibility for your life and for what happened. I genuinely wish you well." I didn't promise that we would become close again. I didn't promise forgiveness would restore the relationship. I simply stopped carrying hatred for her. There is a difference between forgiveness and access. I finally understood that. My boundaries became simple. No more financial emergencies. No more surprise visits. No more asking me to use my professional position. No more family members calling on someone else's behalf. And above all, no more lies. My father asked whether that meant I was cutting off the family. I told him, "I'm not cutting you off to punish you. I'm stepping away because staying the same way would require me to abandon myself again." He didn't respond. Neither did my mother. For once, silence wasn't something I feared. It was something I chose. Months passed. My life became quieter. Not empty. Quiet. There is a difference. I continued working as a judge. I stopped minimizing my accomplishments when people asked about my career. I didn't need to announce my title, but I no longer hid it to make other people comfortable. I became closer to Aunt Janet. Mara remained one of my closest friends. We started having ordinary dinners together. No family emergencies, no accusations, no guilt. Just coffee, laughter, and conversations that didn't leave me exhausted. I began volunteering with a legal education program that helped people understand their rights when facing financial pressure, family manipulation, and legal intimidation. I never told strangers every detail of my story. I didn't need to. I knew what it felt like to believe that keeping the peace was the same thing as being loved. I wanted other people to understand that they were allowed to say no. Sometimes I still thought about Emily. I hoped she was doing better. I hoped she was becoming more accountable, but I accepted that hoping someone changes doesn't mean you have to stand close enough to be hurt while they do it. My relationship with my parents became distant. There were occasional messages, holiday greetings, short updates, nothing more. And strangely, I didn't feel the emptiness I had expected. I felt space. Space to breathe. Space to think. Space to become someone who wasn't constantly measuring her worth against her family's approval. One morning, I stood in my kitchen making coffee before work. The sunlight was coming through the window. My phone was silent. No emergency. No demand. No accusation. I remembered something my father had said that night. "You've never had much to lose." For years, I had believed he meant I had fewer responsibilities. Now I understood how wrong he was. I had my career, my integrity, my future, my peace, the life I had built when nobody was watching. Those were things I had plenty to lose, and I wasn't willing to lose them for anyone. I didn't become a judge to prove my family wrong. I became one because I believed truth mattered. Fairness mattered. Accountability mattered. The irony was that the people who had known me the longest had understood me the least. They thought my greatest strength was that I could survive being sacrificed. They were wrong. My greatest strength was learning that I didn't have to. That morning, I walked into the courthouse like I had done hundreds of times before. The hallway was quiet. I passed the same doors, the same polished floors, the same courtroom where another day's work waited for me. I opened the door. I took my seat. And for the first time, I didn't wonder whether my family would ever understand me. I didn't need them to. I had finally understood myself. If you've ever been treated like the family member who was expected to carry everyone else's mistakes, remember this: love should never require you to destroy yourself. If my story reminded you of someone in your own life, share your experience in the comments. And if you want more stories about family betrayal, boundaries, healing, and finding your strength after being underestimated, subscribe. Because sometimes the most powerful ending isn't watching the people who hurt you lose, it's realizing they no longer have the power to decide who you are. And that was the life I chose. A life where I could finally sit at my own table without wondering whether I was only there because someone needed something from me. A life where peace wasn't something my family gave me, it was something I gave myself.